Welcome back, Spare Parts Army. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. The 9K-38 Igla family of missile systems represents the most advanced of the Soviet Union's man-portable anti-air launchers, so effective that we've seen it still in use today by both sides of the Ukraine conflict. Grab one of these instead so you can stop trying to shoot down Chinese spy balloons with a potato launcher. So how does this Cold War warrior perform on the modern battlefield in Ukraine? What does its development tell us about the strengths and weaknesses of Soviet military engineering? How can you sham your way out of being the private stuck with carrying this thing? Join us as we lock on to the Igla missile system in today's episode. But before we get into that, Japan's military is now doubling their defense budget and adding new equipment to their arsenal. Husk is one Japanese-inspired steel knife that you'll want to add to your own personal arsenal. It's made from high-quality Japanese steel and features an oak wood, dark texture, rustic style handle with a 38-degree blade edge. They're offering 70% off to you guys, so click the link in the description to take advantage. Cooking is my main hobby outside the military, so I was very excited when Husk sent me their extremely sharp blade to replace my old dull kitchen knives that barely work. It made chopping through tough meat and veggies a breeze with its lightweight and durable build. Its heavy-duty stainless Japanese steel was also forged with nature in mind. Add the Husk knife to your everyday carry to always be prepared if you need to cut ropes or prepare food while out camping. Trying out Husk is completely risk-free to you because they assure a 30-day money-back guarantee. Currently, for all you guys in the Spare Parts Army, Husk is running a 70% discount on their authentic Japanese-inspired knives. The deal won't last long though, so make sure to try it out by clicking my special link in the bio. During the early years of the Cold War, defense industries scaled down aircraft missiles to fit into man-portable launchers. But 1960s technology meant this design philosophy came with a lot of limitations. In 1960, the USSR began development of the Strela II as their first production man-portable air defense system, or MANPADS for short. Trust me, that's way better than their original abbreviation of hunky pads. But they ran into issues producing reliable seeker heads, so it wasn't formally adopted into the Red Army until January 1968. Even then, the weapon had severe limitations, with a hit probability of only 25% under test conditions. 25%, that's rookie numbers, you gotta bump that up. And the launcher could only lock on to enemy aircraft from the rear when the hot exhaust nozzles were directly visible. This meant it could only function as a kind of revenge weapon where you could target the enemy aircraft after it had already dropped its payload on you and ruined your day. Here we see a video of a Ukrainian soldier getting a lock on a Russian fighter jet after it dropped its payload. Several upgraded programs increased the reliability of the weapon, and the Soviet Union went on to produce an incredible number of the Strela family, shipping them to basically any country or rebel group in the world who said anything even remotely nice about the hammer and sickle. 2,700 old East German Strela II systems were actually donated by Germany during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Despite the upgrades, the Strela series still had trouble engaging aircraft from anything but a rear angle, and by the early 1970s, aircraft were starting to develop effective countermeasures to heat-seeking missiles like flares and jammers. Designers started a new project, building a missile from the ground up with true all-aspect engagement and better resistance to countermeasures. Codenamed Igla, the Russian word for needle, the project hit roadblocks again, with the seeker head having to restart and reorganize the entire development team in 1974. Due to the delays, the Soviet Union decided to split development into two sections, one that would develop a simpler interim design that could be built sooner, with the other team hammering out the more ambitious design. The Igla-1 went on to become the simpler system and was adopted in 1981, while it took another 2 years for the full capability design to be finished and adopted as simply Igla in 1983. Like the Strela before it, the Igla systems would be heavily produced and exported by the Soviet Union and later Russian Federation, with over 23,000 units shipped by 2015. Produced in large numbers and heavily exported, the Igla is a lightweight system with a sophisticated infrared heat seeker that the Soviet Union built to counter NATO air superiority in case the Cold War ever heated up. Ironically, the Igla is now deployed against other Soviet equipment more so than it's used against NATO aircraft. That's over twice as many Stinger units exported by the US in the same period. The weapon, of course, wasn't perfect, with its own fair share of reliability issues like this one. Don't worry, no one was injured there, but it goes to show the serious forces that you're messing with when you launch one of these things. The Russians began development of a replacement for the Igla in the 1990s called the Verba, But as the Russian economy and defense industry floundered after the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Verba wouldn't be ready until 2014. Because of this delay, the Igla was upgraded into the capable Igla-S variant, and it's still in active service alongside the Verba as production ramps up on the new system. Russia's commander-in-chief of the ground forces, Oleg Salykov, said in an interview with the official newspaper of the Russian Ministry of Defense on September 30th, 2022, that 1/3 of Ukrainian fighter jets were shot down using Igla-S and Verba MANPADS. Oleg Salykov went on to say the greatest burden of covering his troops is with these medium and short-range air defense systems. But the real burden is clearly on me, having to pronounce anything with more than 2 syllables. So obviously we need to take all of this information with a grain of salt because of where it's coming from, but it does hint at something really important here, which is that both sides have suggested that the Igla is highly effective and necessary for covering troops' advances, because otherwise you're completely vulnerable to airstrikes. The greatest strength of the Igla is that it can even reportedly strike cruise missiles flying at close range. There's even some video proof of this occurring, because it's like you guys always say, pics or it didn't happen. So the most modern Igla-S system weighs in at 19 kilograms, or about 41 pounds, including the 11 kilogram missile, and has a reported range of 6 kilometers, up to an altitude of 11,000 feet, allowing it to engage targets in a wide bubble around the shooter. Igla launchers were distributed throughout the Red Army in regimental air defense networks, and were even issued to Soviet submarines to help counter anti-submarine warfare aircraft. Like most MANPADS systems, the Igla is a heat-seeking missile, meaning once the shooter locks onto the target and fires the missile, it steers itself towards the hot exhaust and jet nozzle of an aircraft. The missile contains a gas generator, which drives a small gas turbine to provide electrical power. The piston moves the canards to steer the missile. The Igla stands out as the first Soviet design truly capable of all aspect engagements, meaning the shooter can lock on from the front or sides of an aircraft and not just the rear. It's a huge advantage because you want to be able to shoot down the aircraft before it shoots at you. The Igla also has a more sophisticated sensor with a wider field of view than earlier designs. It's able to detect ultraviolet light in addition to the normal IR band. By combining the IR and UV data, the onboard electronics can build a better picture of the target and ignore countermeasures like flares much more effectively. A direct test by Finland, which used both the Igla and the French Mistral AA systems, found that the Igla had a better seeker than the French design. Whether or not that test is accurate, I don't know, but it's interesting to note that some Soviet-era equipment might have been very well produced. One of the unique features on the Igla not seen in other AA systems is its use of an aerospike at the front of the missile to decrease drag during supersonic flight. Heat-seeking missiles use blunt nose cones for a better field of view to track heat signatures in front of them, but this shape creates a lot of drag when flying supersonic. The short probe on the front of the Igla, however, breaks up the standing air in front of the missile, reducing the shock wave the missile body creates as it flies up to Mach 2.3 towards the target. This doesn't interfere with the sensor behind it, as the spike is placed in the blind spot of the telescopic reflector used by the guidance section. Higher missile speeds mean less time for a pilot to react and use countermeasures or evasive maneuvers. Because man-portable systems have to stay light enough to be carried by a single soldier, they tend to have very small warheads. This isn't seen as too much of a problem though, because militaries use a principle called virtual attrition. Even if your air defense system doesn't shoot down every aircraft that it fires at, as long as it proves enough of a threat that it scares aircraft off or makes them waste munitions in an inaccurate attack, then the air defense system has done its job. This proved highly effective against the American military in Vietnam and against the Soviets in Afghanistan, where both militaries had to restrict the types of aircraft that could fly near the front, as well as the altitude tactical aircraft could strike from, because of the threat of the Strela II and Stinger missiles. Even so, the designers of the Igla system were determined to increase the lethality of their missile by using a fuel that would detonate alongside the warhead when it hit a target. This works over short engagement ranges where the rocket motor still has significant fuel in it to boost the explosive power of the missile, packing an extra punch in a small package. The latest version of the Igla also has proximity sensors that allow the missile to detonate on a near miss, spraying the target with shrapnel. After there were some bad experience with Strela-equipped troops having terrible aircraft identification skills while in combat, The Soviets developed optional Identify Friend or Foe systems, or IFF, that could clamp onto Igla systems and warn the operator if the target they were aiming at was friendly or preventing fire altogether. Because the Igla was designed in the Cold War era when the Soviets anticipated skies full of NATO air power, these IFF systems became a problem in the post-Soviet era. According to historian and defense analyst Steven Zulga, the IFF systems had trouble during the 2008 war between Russia and Georgia because both sides used Soviet airframes. The IFF systems couldn't determine which aircraft were friendly and which were enemy. As we've seen in the Ukraine conflict though, it's been going on since 2014. Engineers have since fixed this problem as both sides seem equally capable of shooting down the other Soviet-style aircraft. Combat history and proliferation controversy. Although the Cold War gone hot scenario that the Igla was designed for thankfully never came to pass, the Igla proved itself all over the world, from how aggressively the USSR and Russia exported and offered production licenses to the system. The first documented loss of an aircraft due to an Igla was in 1991 during Operation Desert Storm, when an American F-16 was shot down over Iraq and a pilot was captured. 13 coalition aircraft were shot down by Iraqi MANPADS during Desert Storm from a combination of Iglas and Strela 3s. During the Sichuan conflict between India and Pakistan in 1992, an Indian operation around Badur Post was counterattacked by Pakistan forces. An Indian Igla shot down the helicopter that was carrying Brigadier Mossad Navidi Anwari along with his assault troops, causing the entire attack to falter. But probably the most infamous use of the Igla during the 1990s was on April 6, 1994, when a private jet carrying the president of both Rwanda and Burundi was shot down by a pair of Igla-1 missiles, triggering the events of the Rwanda genocide and a bloody civil war. Throughout the late 1990s and 2000s, you might remember that there were fears of incidents of MANPAD systems like the Igla being used against civilian airliners by terrorist or criminal elements, and it became a cause for international action. The Wassenaar Arrangement was signed by 42 countries in 1996 with a subsection for missile systems export controls. The US-led program in 2003 sought to dismantle and dispose of 40,000 missiles from mostly Eastern Europe to help combat missile proliferation. While fears of terrorists shooting down jetliners from coast to coast fueled a lot of anxiety after 9/11, defense analysts debated how much danger civilian aircrafts were really in. Because the battery coolant units on MANPAD launchers have a shelf life of only around 10 years, before the chemicals in them start to degrade and become useless. The wide Cold War exports of the Igla and Strela launchers to unstable countries aren't as much of a risk as you might think. During the 2003 Iraq War, for instance, very few operational MANPAD systems were found in Iraq because of the decay of these crucial components. For countries with recent supplies of battery coolant units, though, the Igla is still proving itself a dangerous missile. Ukraine has used their Igla missiles to great effect during Russia's 2022 invasion, especially during the opening phases of the war, when they still hadn't received many of the FIM-92 Stingers and other Western shipments. There are scores of videos of Ukrainian MANPAD teams shooting down Russian aircraft, drones, and cruise missiles. Many of these were confirmed or suspected Igla missiles. Russia's loss of attack helicopters, including their most advanced Ka-52 Alligators, have been so severe that they've had to change tactics to inaccurate pitch-up rocket attacks from afar rather than risk running the MANPAD's gauntlet. A textbook example of that virtual attrition principle that we mentioned earlier. While Russian forces have undoubtedly used their own Igla and Verbus systems to shoot down Ukrainian aircraft, their kill claims in the current conflict are dodgy at best, having claimed numbers so ridiculously high that they would have shot down every single Ukrainian aircraft several times by now. Conclusion and wrap-up. MANPAD systems in general are shorter range than other air defense systems like SAM batteries or radar-guided missiles, but their portability means they can strike from anywhere, and their passive IR sensors mean they don't give pilots any warning that they're being attacked until the missile is in the air. The Igla family of weapons is a competent third-generation MANPAD system that has been continuously upgraded since the 1980s to keep pace with Western designs and aircraft countermeasures. representing a huge leap forward from the older Strela designs that generally lagged 5 years behind NATO missiles technology. Interestingly, the Igla forms the basis for some of NATO countries' own MANPAD designs, like the Polish Grom, later renamed the Piron and exported to the Baltic states. The Igla hit probability of 50 to 75% today is respectable, but lower than most modern versions of the FIM-92 Stinger according to most accounts. The Stinger also uses a more advanced IFF system that should result in lower fratricide results. Even if it's not as shiny as the latest Stinger system though, the Igla is a dangerous opponent on the modern battlefield, and pilots underestimate it at their own peril.